Hello, welcome to Tales Under the Cat Tree. My name is Dileepu Jayawardena, better known as Dups. In this podcast, we'll explore the wonderful worlds created by words on paper, from technology and the future to fiction and other realms. If you want to get to know me and find out who I am, you can listen to episode number 1, where I attempt to put you to sleep with all the gory details. Please remember that all my writing is available on my Substack at tales.dups.ca, including the articles that make up this episode. If you enjoy this or any of my writing, please do subscribe to either this podcast or the Substack, where I hope to bring you articles, stories, and interviews regularly. Welcome to episode 11. Writing about experiences around specific pivotal moments in my life is not easy for me. I easily get wrapped up in my own emotions. I find that autobiography does not come naturally to me. I think some of the closest autobiographical style writing I have ever done I have featured in episode 6 when I talked about my own immigrant story. Today, I would like to explore this idea of autobiography with some help from my former professor, Dr. Erwin Warkentin. Erwin, as I call him these days, has been one of my dearest mentors and friends throughout the past 30 years of my life. I am proud to have been one of his first German students at Memorial University when I was a wet behind the ears, snot-faced undergraduate student. He continues to impart some modicum of wisdom and put up with my questions when I call. Erwin was my German professor, but he has at various times been also the head of the Memorial German and Russian department, as well as having created the communications program at the university. This amongst many, many other titles and professions. Today, I'm going to read a piece that he wrote about the first and last memories he had about his mother, after which he and I will have a conversation about how he feels about how I read his piece online, and much, much more. First and Last Memories of My Mother by E.J. Warkentin. I became an orphan sometime between 2:30 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon of March 22nd, 2012. It was 9 days after my mother's 85th birthday. I don't know how to feel about all this now that I'm an orphan. We often think of children as orphans, but never of those of us who are considerably older. But there is still that little boy who once was, who is now without a mother and a father. I couldn't be with her in her final moments, but my sister Mindy and my Aunt Sarah were there when her life came to an end. We knew she was dying and didn't have very long to live. I had made a conscious decision about a month before to see her while she was alive and not grieve next to a coffin that held everything but her essence. I had a good time with my mother the last time I was with her. The last thing I will remember of her is the glowing smile and a wave goodbye as the elevator doors closed on the palliative ward in the Misericordia Hospital, or better known as the Misery, that was now her home. Oddly enough, it was in this ward, or perhaps one floor below, that I was born some 64 years ago. It had once been the maternity ward. It's funny how I got to say goodbye in pretty much the same place I first said hello to her in 1959. Life certainly can throw strange stuff at you when you're least expecting it. The last memories we have of people are important, but so are the first ones, which often get lost in the mists of a life. My first conscious memory of her is when she took me to the downtown Woolworths in Winnipeg. She was all dolled up with lipstick and wore a pleated cotton floral dress. She wore a hat that seemed way too small, but that still managed to remain perched on her head at what seemed a rather precarious angle. It was most likely held in place by innumerable hat pins and the sheer speckled veil that billowed out from under it like a creeping fog and covered part of her forehead, as was the practice of most stylish women at the time. The heels that she wore made her look even taller than she was, at least in my eyes. I was just big enough to get my elbows onto the lunch counter at the Woolworth store. That is, if I sat on one of the revolving stools that ensured that all the patrons had enough elbow room when tucking into their lunches or dinners. The hot dog and lemonade tasted so good that sunny July day. It truly was special, because while we hopped a bus going there, we took a taxi on the way home. I've no clue as to the business that she had downtown, but at my age, it was of little concern. We arrived back at 397 Maryland Street in style. All the neighbors were watching through their windows from behind their curtains in their darkened living rooms. They, no doubt, wondering what was going on, that we would be set down in front of our house by a taxi. Taxis were expensive, and my mother was never known for spending a penny that she didn't have to. Then again, perhaps that was the point. I remember sliding around on the vinyl seats of the cab and the conversation my mum had with that old cabbie. They were talking about the virtues of taking Redpath cabs over the ubiquitous yellow cabs. My mother swore she would never use the yellow cabs, no doubt because of some prior bad experiences where the cabbie had taken the long way round, rather than the shortcut she'd told him to take. I didn't really know what the reasons were. I was simply too busy fumbling with a lock knob and resting my chin where the glass meets the solid metal of the car, with my nose pushed up against the nicotine-stained window. The cab made a sharp corner and bumped over the old, now abandoned streetcar tracks on Portage Avenue. The people, cars, and impressions flew by. Eaton's, Lyceum, Kresge's, Met-Store, Arthur Murray's, the Hudson's Bay, Capitol Theatre, United College CBC, Pool Hall, Casa Loma, Harmon's Drugs Fire Station, Little Jimmy's, Heckman's Barbershop, Gervie's, Stone's, home. Mum seemed so happy and alive and independent, and she wore that same smile that I then saw in that last shared moment as we looked at one another through the closing elevator doors, accompanied by the beeping, buzzing, and humming of a busy hospital ward. So you just heard me tell a story that was written by Dr. Warkentin. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, Dr. Warkentin has been one of my professors and mentors throughout my life, ever since I was about 18 years old till I am whatever I am today. And last year, when I was visiting Dr. Warkentin in Berlin, he and I were having lots of discussions about writing as I was sitting down to start writing myself. And as we were talking about writing, he pulled out a book that his daughter had asked him to prepare for his grandchildren. And it was stories of his life. Later, we discussed a lot about what these stories might mean to him and to his family down the road. And so first, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Warkentin. Hello, Dr. Warkentin, or Erwin, as I now call you.
Yeah, hi. How are you doing?
Good.
I still call you Dalipa, not Dupes.
Oh, well, only my mother calls me that, which is an appropriate segue to what I just read. So this is a very personal piece that you wrote about your mother.
Absolutely. It's one of these pieces where I have difficulty controlling my emotions because there are a lot of emotions connected to it. And it's so different from the other writing that I get to do. It's an interesting exercise, especially if someone reads it to me, as you just did. It's an odd sort of experience. It's almost out of body.
How is it different? Is it because I put the intonations and the inflections in the different places that you would have seen?
Yes, absolutely. There were certain passages, the passage where you named these place names.
Eaton's, Lyceum, Kresge's, Met-Store, Arthur Murray's, the Hudson's Bay.
Exactly. You actually imparted some speed. You made it sound as though the vehicle was going faster. You made it sound interesting. For me, it was terribly uninteresting. These were just places along the way. And yes, they're important to me, but the way you read it, all of a sudden, it kind of opened my eye. Oh, yeah, okay. These are maybe important things to talk about in terms of, making the mundane interesting. I don't know if that's how it works, but perhaps.
So when I was reading it, I mean, I get the emotion and the feeling of that last time you saw your mother and the first time. I mean, those are clear to me. But obviously, I have no connection to your mother, and I only have a connection to you. So I'm imagining the child, Erwin, and the adult Erwin giving the story. How do you feel when you hear my words, dude?
Exactly. I'm a little bit distant from it when I hear it coming from you, because when I read this story to myself, clearly, yes, sometimes you read it out loud, but most of the time it's simply quiet reading to yourself as you're looking at the text. When I read this to myself, I see my mother. I'm just an observer in the story, as it were. However, when you read it to me, all of a sudden I have this out-of-body experience where I'm looking at myself. I'm looking at this little boy that I did not really seem that aware of. The little boy was the narrator, if anything. And in some ways, I thought, well, maybe completely unimportant because I was focused on my mother. And by having you read this to me in this way and give these different interpretations of the text, in the way you read it, all of a sudden I'm focusing on the little boy, on myself. And so that I find incredibly interesting.
So I think one of the really interesting things for me is when I write something autobiographical, I do get lost in the emotion of my memory. Now that you're just imagining the child and seeing it through my reading, do you have that same feeling of the emotion, or is it different?
No, the emotion is still there. It may actually be more profound because when I'm reading it to myself, I have control over the text, as it were. And I know absolutely what's coming in the text. However, when you read it, the fact that you'll put a different intonation on a different word or emphasize something, that kind of alienates the piece from me. That is, it creates this distance that doesn't normally exist. And so, yeah, the emotion may actually be even more intense in that I don't have absolute control over what's being read, in particular, in how it's being read.
Well, yeah, exactly. You know the words, you know where the story is going, but it's the how am I going to say the words that are coming up? So how does this feel now that you've written this? And of course, this is going into that book that you're going to give your grandchildren. So what does this mean to you, like to have them read it, knowing that, they might be much older when they read it?
And the interesting thing is that I experience them now as a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. And they're actually about the age that I was in this story. The older one, the 5-year-old. The 3-year-old, he'll get there too. And for me to know that they will read this, the important thing is that they'll know something about the essence of their grandfather. Beyond, me being playful with them, me bringing them toys or gifts or things like that, me allowing them to get away with stuff that I would have never allowed my son, for example, to get away with. It will hopefully give them a broader view of who their grandfather is and was. So, in other words, I'm passing something on to another generation so that they can perhaps understand me. Now, there's another aspect to this, and that is perhaps I'm creating my own defense.
Defense in what way?
Defense in they may hear certain things about their grandfather that aren't particularly positive. I'm not saying nasty things or anything like that, but my son may remember certain events in certain ways, and he may inadvertently have dropped them at some point on them. And in this way, I can kind of defend myself before the fact.
That's a good point. Actually, it's very interesting because I guess in some ways, when you have children and and the human race continues on generation through generation, we pass on our genes. And then what we hope to do is obviously we teach the children, they get stuff into their brains. We stuff them with all sorts of stuff, whether it's ethics, values, or German history. And then we send them out into the world. They collect all sorts of other experiences and they become a fully formed individual. And I guess in some ways, what you're doing is kind of affecting that what is carried on to the next generation. And it's almost like a genome in some ways, except you get to control it. You get to control exactly what happens there.
Exactly. It's a genome that I'm passing on, but one that I have gone in and manufactured or I've altered in some way. It should be known that I also include unflattering things in my stories about myself. Not just the positive. I want them to get the idea that there's more to their grandfather than just kind of this statue that's been created or this idol that's been created, but rather that he was a fully formed human being with all the foibles. And hopefully they can then also learn something from the negative aspects of, who their grandfather was and some of the things that he may have done. Not all of them were positive. Some of them were laughable. Others, well, they were perhaps a little more serious.
Well, isn't that what they call a human life? That
Yes,
is the human experience.
exactly. And I'm hoping to pass that on.
So going back to the story, one of the interesting things for me reading it, of course, is that I know you as my professor, as a friend. And this is a very personal piece, right? It's not like when you were teaching me about, the letters of Werther or Goethe, we weren't exactly talking about your mother or your past. And what's really interesting to me is that this gives me an insight that I didn't have to you, which if I were to read someone's autobiography of a movie star or something like that, and I can see that, it doesn't really affect me. It's like, oh yeah, that's interesting. But this is, of course, I can actually talk to you about it. And one of the interesting things I find is what you do put in and what you don't put in. What didn't you put in here? Because there's a lot here that I can actually pick out and say, okay, she has a glowing smile and wave goodbye as the elevator doors closed. But you don't talk about what she was wearing. You don't think about any of her pain or anything else that might be happening. You're thinking about the positive.
And for me at that time, that was important because we all knew that she was going to die. She knew that she would die, and that it would not take very long for her to pass on. My two sisters are both nurses. Both of them have worked, and one of them still does work on a palliative care unit. So, and we'd already been through the drill once with my father, so we knew what was going to happen. And so we thought it would be kind of useless to focus on the negative thing. Yeah, there's negative things that are associated with memories of my mother. And yes, we are selective in the memories that we pass on. You have to remember that the last bit of my career I spent talking about and writing about propaganda. Essentially, this also works like a propaganda piece of sorts. If you were to look at it through the lens of a propaganda expert, they'd be able to pick this apart and say, "Oh yeah, okay, this is what he's doing. This is, he's emphasizing this, he's downplaying that. That incident when he was 16 years old and his mother really got ticked off at him, or the first time she caught him swearing. All of that is gone. It's not there." Because when it comes to saying goodbye to someone that stuff is unimportant. It's the positive stuff that, in my view at least, is important. When you're talking about a personal relationship with someone that is that close to you, and in particular, the location, for me, that was the thing that struck me. I remember when I left the hospital, I drove to my sister's, and she was a nurse on that particular ward. She kind of kept mother close, as it were. And then she pointed out to me, she says, "You do know that used to be the maternity ward." And then all of it, of course, all these conversations over the years clicked together that, yes, I was saying goodbye to her in the same place I said hello. It's one of these things that is a profoundly emotional thing that we try to articulate in some sort of way. And I think this is my attempt to being someone who is also emotionally articulate. I don't know if that's a thing or not, but to be emotionally articulate, I think, is also important. And as we get older, it becomes more and more important, I think. And I'm sure that you're going to start experiencing some of that too as you get older. You're still that young man that I met in the second class that I ever taught at Memorial. And I say the second class because there was someone missing the first class.
Fair enough. I think what I find quite fascinating is that we spend a lot of time thinking about the mundane in the people we remember. If I read this, and when I read through this, it's really interesting to me how we as humans, and this is not just you, and I realize I do it as well. I think about the mundane. I think about my dad and how he would always have the pen in the right place. I don't think about the extraordinary thing he did or whatever the case may be. So when I remember people, I remember the mundane. Why do you think that is?
Those are the personal moments. Those are the moments we don't share with anyone else. If you think about that event with my mother and what kind of surrounds it is, going to Woolworths, having lunch with her. This was just the two of us. Yeah, there were other people around. Yes, my father knew that she was going to go out that morning and afternoon, but it was just the two of us that experienced that. So for me, it's one of these things I can hold on to and say, "This is mine. This is all mine." Nobody else can have that. And it's those mundane moments that give that to us. You know, you talked about your father having the pen in just the right place. Well, has anyone else noticed that? It's a very special thing that you noticed about your father, and something that kind of binds the two of you together. I think we have that with any number of different people. Those are the things that make these people precious to us, because we get an insight into their very private sphere, which they don't allow too terribly many other people to have access to.
So, for my last question, or the last question I'm going to ask you, Erwin, is really about, you've spent your life writing. You have spent the last 30 years putting together books, papers, lectures. They're very different, though. It is now at this stage that and we are taught never to write with I when we're doing academic papers. How does it feel to put the word I? How does it feel to put yourself down on paper and actually have an opinion?
It feels good. It really does. I don't think I realized how much I resented that practice of never using I in a paper, unless someone else was using the word I and I had to record that, in a document somewhere. It's important to be able to tell people, this is what I think, not, oh, this is what the evidence points towards, and blah, 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 on and on it goes. But rather saying, okay, here's something we're not too sure about, why we think this way, but this is the way I think. This is also another one of these words that is banished from academic writing. This is how I feel. You can't, when I'm writing about Wolfgang Borchardt or Goethe or Schiller or one of these guys, I can never say, I feel this way in an academic piece. I can certainly talk to individuals that may have seen a play together with me, and we can talk about how it made us feel and things like that. But in an academic world, you don't talk about how you feel about a piece, and that may be changing to some degree, but there's still a lot of this, oh no, we don't want to talk about feelings. We all only want to talk about provable concepts that can be proven, through logical means.
Isn't there a world where you have both? You can have the proven logic, but still have the writer's feeling. Because if you don't know the writer's feeling, the biases creep in just by the things you don't say, the words you use. This is what I've always felt about writing and bias and
It
issues.
it all depends on whether Plato or Aristoteles is, on top at any particular time in your mind. If you kind of go along with Plato, yeah, okay, feelings can figure into things. If you're a strict Aristotelian, well, feelings have to kind of be left to the side. They're not that significant. They're not that important. It all depends, and it is a struggle. Now, don't get me wrong. Yes, emotions are part of even academic writing. I was told by my supervisor, Dr. Holger Pausch at the University of Alberta, he says you're far more interesting when you're engaged, when you're pissed off about something. And that's the way he wanted me to write. He did say within reason. There's that word again, reason. But there can be and there should be a place for both. I don't know. I think perhaps we've kind of gone there and we've passed that point. If you look at things transpiring in the world today, for example, it's all about if you listen to any of the commentators, it has very little to do with logic and has a lot to do with how they feel about something. So maybe we've gone too far in certain ways.
What's funny is, and the reason why I brought it up is because 30 years ago, you and I sat in the University Quadrangle outside the Arts Building, and we were talking about Werther. And I was, of course, writing The Muse, and we were talking about journalism, and we were talking about authenticity and non bias in journalism. And you actually did use the expression, if I remember correctly, you need to be engaged if you're going to be listening and writing.
Yeah, yeah. And so there you can see how this gets passed on from one to the other. I was told that by my supervisor, and I'm sorry it's not exclusive to you, but I've tried to pass that on to others. You have to be engaged. Otherwise, why bother?
Well, I have to say that I was engaged reading the story out and watching your face as I read it out, which was entertaining in and of itself. So thank you so much, Dr. Warkentin. Now, before we say goodbye, we are going to do more episodes together because we have a whole set, right?
Yep. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. And there's going to be a time at least when you're going to read one of my stories out. So it's going to be entertaining for me to hear.
Yeah, so then I don't get to be so much the sidekick. The funny thing in all of this is that we've kind of come full circle in many ways. That it's me now submitting something to you to have it read, and me sitting there wondering, does he like it? Is it any good?
Well, I haven't given you your mark back.
I know, and I'm waiting.
And maybe you'll find out next week when I give you your mark. So again, thank you very much, Dr. Warkentin. Erwin, it's been a pleasure as always.
You're more than welcome.
Till next time. Thank you for listening to the Tales Under the Cat Tree podcast. I hope this conversation has spurred you to think about your own autobiography and the words and feelings and thoughts that you might want to pass on to the next generation. I will be back next week with another episode. You can reach me through email at contact@dups.ca, on Blue Sky @dups.ca, or on this Substack and this post at tales.dups.ca. Remember to subscribe so I can get to know you better and learn from you. Give your pet a cuddle and your loved ones a hug till we meet again for some Tales Under the Cat Tree.
You can scrap that part if you like.